I want to bring in MS Now's Ken Delanian. Joyce Vance is a former U.S. attorney and MS Now legal analyst. Peter Baker is back with me. Ken, just so I understand, the president threatened to sue his own government, then agreed to drop the suit in exchange for the creation of a $1.7 billion fund to pay what a lot of people assume will be largely his friends and allies?
You've got that right, Chris. This is an absolutely astounding development. Now, Donald Trump was wronged by a contractor who was working for the IRS, who is now serving 5 years in prison because he leaked his tax return. So that part of this is legitimate. But the idea that Donald Trump could sue his own government and then the people that Donald Trump has appointed to run the Justice Department are in charge of being supposedly an adversary, taking an adversarial position to Donald Trump's lawsuit, that was never realistic. And now we've seen the sort of absurd end result of this, which is that he's dropping his lawsuit. They're creating this massive fund of taxpayer money that they are going to dole out now, not to Donald Trump personally, but to people they say have been victims of weaponization. This idea, though, of weaponization, Chris, by the way, has never been proven. They've had the records. I keep saying this for a year and a half. They own all the records. They've not produced a shred of evidence that any action by the Justice Department in the previous administration was motivated by bias or politics or was somehow inappropriate. They just haven't done it. But yet they keep saying it. And the idea that former January 6th defendants or many of the people prosecuted in the Russia investigation or by Jack Smith or investigated by Jack Smith are going to now reap a financial beneficiary from taxpayers. I would argue that's going to get a lot of not only Democrats and people on the left, but independents paying very close attention to what's going on here, Chris.
I have to ask Peter the question, though, then to follow that up with, Peter, how are Americans, we just did the whole segment about how they're saying very clearly we're hurting. You need to pay attention to what we need. How are they supposed to react to $1.7 billion going to people who claim that they were somehow targeted unfairly?
Yeah, and by the way, it's people unfairly targeted as Trump defines it, not the other way around. There's a lot of people who think they're being targeted unfairly by Trump's Justice Department. And there's a lot of, by the way, judges and grand juries who have agreed with that assessment to the opposite of, Ken's point, where there hasn't been that kind of finding with regard to the other administration. So does that mean that supporters of Joe Biden can now go to the government and say, we think that Trump has weaponized government against us and give us money? I mean, this is a remarkable thing, as Ken just said. We've never seen anything like this. The President of the United States is using taxpayer money to pay off his supporters and allies, and in a way that's not judged by an independent body or by a panel of judges or something like that, but by a panel that he will be in charge of, he will control. And this is, who are we talking about here? It may not go to the president himself, but will it go to people who stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021? That seems like a possibility, doesn't it? And I think that's something that most Americans who are struggling to pay their pay their grocery bills, struggling to pay their gas bills, and are watching the president of the United States, who, by the way, is personally profiting off this presidency in remarkable ways. 3,700 stock transactions were reported the other day in the first quarter alone. Billions of dollars coming into him and his friends and his family and allies from various business ventures. That doesn't help anybody pay their bills.
Joyce, is this legal?
This is just rank corruption. I think we're well past the point where we can afford to pretend and use pretty words to dress up the way this president is running government. This is taxpayer funding that he will siphon off to use to compensate his allies, to reward his allies. And one of the reasons it's, I think, very difficult for the public, other than our viewers who are very wrapped up in what's going on, but for casual observers to understand just how corrupt this is because of the way the administration dresses it up in the language of weaponization. So that if you're just an average American with, a life to live, you might think, well, this is just politics. Republicans talk about weaponization, Democrats talk about weaponization. But what we've seen the administration do today, I think very starkly puts on display the corruption that we're seeing from how this administration is handling the matter. Because the January 6th defendants, they weren't convicted by the Biden Justice Department. They were charged, and then their cases went to juries of their peers. They went in front of judges. All of their due process rights were accorded to them, and then they were convicted. That's not weaponization. That's the criminal justice process working. What the Trump administration is now claiming as justification for creation of this $1.7 billion fund is a fund that was roughly half that size, the Keeps Eagle Fund that was created during the Obama administration to compensate Native American farmers and ranchers for fully proven discrimination. It was systemic discrimination that denied Native farmers and ranchers credit. And so that fund was devised to restore them to the position that they should have been in. That's nothing like what we're looking at today. This fund, which is designed to permit the president to transfer your tax dollars and my tax dollars to people who supported him on January 6th and in some of his other ventures. That, quite frankly, is how a corrupt government operates.
So if you are, Ken, someone who feels that the Trump administration, that the government has been weaponized against you, is there any sense in applying for this to this fund?
I think people will find sense in doing it to make a point, Chris. No one sitting here or watching this believes that it will be a fruitful exercise. Somebody like a James Comey or John Brennan applying to say I've been targeted by a weaponized Justice Department. That's not what's going on here. This is just not on the level. We can all see that. I mean, Todd Blanche is out there. He was out there over the weekend saying that the Russia investigation essentially wronged many of the people that had investigated. And people are reminding him now on social media that the Marco Rubio-led Senate Intelligence Committee found that what happened with Trump and Russia and the Trump campaign's dalliance with Russia was a grave counterintelligence threat to the United States. That's all down the memory hole now. Part of this is about rewriting history, because not only will this fund be allowed to make monetary compensations, it will also be allowed to issue formal apologies on behalf of the United States. And again, this is part of this effort by the Trump administration to rewrite the history of the last 8 years of the Russia investigation, of the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and of the Jack Smith investigation, Chris. And they're actually succeeding beyond their wildest dreams in doing that, Chris.
So much of the frustration that we hear from voters and everyday Americans, Joyce, is that they feel like there's nothing they can do. And that's why I asked you about, is this even legal? I think there's also a question about what generated this, which is the IRS lawsuit, which Arlisa Rubin and many other legal experts have said there's virtually no basis, if any basis, for that lawsuit. And yet they settled it in spite of the fact that it was a weak lawsuit, or perhaps one with non-existent legal foundation. Is there no recourse?
Right. So the settlement actually explains why one of the threshold reasons that the lawsuit was meritless. I mean, it was meritless for a lot of reasons, but you can't sue yourself. You can't have the same party on both sides of the V, the plaintiff and the defendant. And because Donald Trump was both the plaintiff and, as the head of government, also the defendant, you can see how that creates precisely the situation that we ended up in here, where there's a sort of collusive, sort of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink solution to a problem that doesn't exist. And that's how you get $1.7 billion in taxpayer money transferred to Donald Trump's allies. Of course, the challenges are just beginning. I think that a congressional challenge has actually been filed this morning. There will be others from other corners. You know, one of the problems of living in this era is that as individuals, we frequently don't have recourse to solutions. But what we do have is recourse to our elected officials. And so encouraging states' attorneys general or members of Congress to hold this administration accountable is actually a very meaningful form of individual action that we overlook all too often, thinking that our voices don't count. But when all of those voices are used together, you know, democracy is, in fact, a participatory sport. It does land. It does have impact. We're at one of those critical turning points right now, where Donald Trump has been given so much room to roam by the Supreme Court, by the supine Congress, by other actors who won't rein him in, that he's engaging in this just sort of wide open, lights on, in front of everyone, effort to use taxpayer funding for his own personal purposes. This is a moment where people who still have the ability to tell him no need to step up. And as citizens, we need to encourage all of those folks to do their jobs.
And we're going to have more on that congressional action in our next hour. Joyce, you're staying with us. Ken Delaney and Peter Baker. Peter, I've been reading the reviews for your son Theo's book, which, excuse me, I couldn't put it down. I can't stop talking about it. That's the smile of a proud dad. Just had to throw that in there.
Donald Trump cannot keep this Epstein scandal out of the news or out of Congress's purview, even with what you see, a lot of other things going on today. The House Oversight Committee probing those last Epstein days, which were under the oversight of the Trump DOJ and Bill Barr. They heard from Tova Noel. That's a former corrections officer who was crucial in the period leading up to Epstein's death. This was private testimony. Noel had already told federal investigators, as we've mentioned in some of our prior reporting, that she believes, based on her service there, that she was the last person to see Epstein alive. She says, inmate counts around 10 p.m. After that check, she and a colleague, though, didn't do the other required checks. And as we showed you in this timeline, where we meticulously used prior government information and newly revealed materials from the Epstein files, there were a lot of questions on how the Trump DOJ and Bill Barr's team dealt with what were those final days, questions of negligence or worse. before Epstein was allowed to do something that inmates are not supposed to be able to do in custody, which is allegedly take their own life or die. In another protocol violation, they failed to do required overnight checks, the inmate counts every 30 minutes, which was part of the protection and the whole point of having him in this special unit. Instead, he's alone and unmonitored for 8 hours. This new law famously forced out the secret internal documents from the same probe, showing other views within the FBI about the last person near Epstein's cell. And that night, a blurry orange figure appears. The original FBI log calls it that flash of orange could possibly be an inmate. And note that careful description, because then the DOJ review of the same footage changes it to write, quote, inmates are currently on lockdown. It's possible someone is carrying inmate linen up the stairs. Was that a good faith mistake or a malicious cover-up? DOJ indicted the guards on duty that night for lying about the inmate checks that never happened. That's a big deal. It added pressure, though, for those guards to cooperate in the probe, and the DOJ later dropped those same charges. That's some of what we've been detailing. Congresswoman Stansbury, who was attending this high-stakes interview today, does describe all as forthcoming, saying they focused on the details of the night, some of which I touched on there in those questions, and also discussing the loss of her job.
My takeaway is two things. One, the system once again failed survivors. It was clear incompetence and just a lack of oversight.
She does feel like her termination was unfair and that had it not been Jeffrey Epstein, she would not have been fired.
She didn't do her job, but it seemed like people weren't doing their job generally at the MCC.
We're now joined by Democratic Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury on that critical House Oversight Committee. Welcome back. What do you think Congress learned today that's important in a series of events that we and other outlets have documented showed incompetence, failures, if not worse, from the then Trump DOJ overseeing that prison?
Well, I certainly agree with my colleague from Virginia, which is that the system over and over again has failed survivors. And, you know, this was the first time that we've heard from Ms. Noel about her firsthand account of what happened that night. She herself stated in that interview that she does believe that it was a suicide, but she did say that there were irregularities, not just that evening, but in general, that there was understaffing, that she and her colleagues had been working long hours and doubles, that they had not done the normal checks. But my takeaway from the interview was not that it was unusual per Epstein. In fact, I asked her that question, was there anything weird about that night or unusual about how the situation was handled? And she said no, but it's clear that the system was not well managed and that she feels, in her opinion, that she was terminated and indicated that it was unfair. Had it been any other inmate, the way the system was being managed, that she would not have been fired.
Well, I mean, of all the issues here, I don't think whether the guards were sanctioned in the right way is high on anyone's priority list. They failed to do the checks. The night they failed to do the checks, he's found dead. There were, as you know, allegations of the shredded documents that have now been proven. She may or may not have had visibility on that. But again, that goes to what was going on inside the prison. There were these payments. I wanted to ask you about this. That apparently you and your colleagues asked about financial payments she got in these increments before the Epstein death. She said that was from working overtime. Did that all scan to you? And do you think that she and others could shed any light on how Epstein got special treatment? Because, well, if it were chess, guards are like pawns, and the accountability doesn't stop with them. But I've read the IG report. Epstein was granted these exceptions. He was using a phone call. He had a final phone call leading up to the night of his death that was on the non-recorded line, which was only allowed because a different guard, I should mention, but a guard walked him to. He allowed that. I mean, there's a lot of these type of problems. So your view on those issues and her credibility today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm only here to report on the actual deposition that I sat in parts of today. I can't speak to the broader management of the prison itself. But what I can say is that she did validate that there was special treatment of Jeffrey Epstein. She said that he was given access to a CPAP, that he had special sheets, and that all indications were that he was being given special treatment inside the jail. But I specifically asked her whether she felt that there were those inside the prison, either in the management or in the guards or other prisoners who wished Jeffrey Epstein harm, and she said no. She also talked about witnessing the body as it was removed. So, there were absolutely irregularities in the prison, but I don't think that of the members and staff that were in the room, we walked away with the impression that outside of just blatant incompetence and mismanagement, that there was a larger conspiracy at hand based on her testimony. It doesn't mean that there wasn't, but based on what we witnessed in the room today. Now, with respect to these payments, what she stated in the room was that they were cash payments that she deposited herself. She said multiple times under oath that they had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, but I offered her the opportunity at the end of the day to clarify the source of the payments, and she declined. So,
yeah. So, what would cash payments be? I mean, it doesn't sound like something that would be connected to normal employ.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were other parts of the interview that happened while I was not in the room in which she clarified that she was working potentially other jobs and overtime. But like I said, during the portion of the interview where I asked if she wanted